When Maya Chen walked into Westfield High School that October morning, she had no idea that 3 simple words would change everything. Tyler Brooks looked her straight in the eye, drew back his head, and spat directly at her face while his friends laughed and filmed. What happened next would be talked about for years to come, but not for the reasons Tyler expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign of trouble came during Maya's second week at Westfield High School when she chose the wrong lunch table. She'd been quietly eating her sandwich in the back corner of the cafeteria, sketching in her notebook between bites, when Tyler Brooks and his crew decided she looked like easy prey. The 17-year-old had transferred from San Francisco after her father's promotion brought the family to Riverside, Colorado, and everything about this place felt different from her old school. Tyler Brooks ruled Westfield's social hierarchy with the confidence that came from 3 consecutive state football championships and a father who donated generously to the athletic department. At 6'2" with perfectly styled blonde hair and a Letterman jacket that seemed permanently attached to his shoulders, he moved through the hallways like he owned them. His girlfriend Jessica Martinez, head cheerleader with a smile that could cut glass, rarely left his side. Derek Wilson, Tyler's linebacker best friend since elementary school, provided the muscle when Tyler's charm wasn't enough. Maya noticed them approaching her table before they noticed her noticing. Years of martial arts training had taught her to read body language, and these 3 were broadcasting aggression from across the room. She quietly closed her sketchbook and placed her hands flat on the table, centering herself the way her sensei had taught her. "Hey, new girl," Tyler announced, sliding uninvited into the seat across from her. "Didn't anyone tell you this section is reserved?" His voice carried that particular tone of manufactured authority that bullies perfected by junior high. Maya looked up from her lunch with calm brown eyes. "I don't see any signs posted." Her voice was steady, polite even, which seemed to surprise Tyler. Most of his victims either cowered immediately or got flustered trying to defend themselves. Jessica laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, she's got attitude. How cute." She examined her perfectly manicured nails as if bored by the entire interaction. "Tyler, baby, maybe we should explain how things work around here." Derek cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet corner of the cafeteria. Other students were beginning to notice the confrontation, but instead of intervening, they turned away. Everyone knew better than to get involved when Tyler Brooks was making a point. "See, it's not about signs," Tyler continued, his blue eyes never leaving Maya's face. "It's about understanding your place. You're nobody here. Your daddy might have money to move to our town, but that doesn't make you one of us." He leaned forward across the table. "California girl probably thinks she's better than us small-town kids, right?" Maya carefully wrapped up the remainder of her sandwich. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just trying to eat lunch." She started to stand, but Derek's heavy hand landed on her shoulder, pushing her back down. "Nobody said you could leave," Derek growled. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of pure muscle, he was used to intimidating people with his presence alone. "Tyler's not done talking to you." The cafeteria noise seemed to fade as more students became aware of the drama unfolding. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on their table, but she also sensed something else: fear. These kids weren't just avoiding involvement because they didn't want trouble. They were genuinely afraid of what Tyler and his friends might do. "Let me guess," Tyler said, warming to his theme. "Daddy's some hotshot executive who thinks he can just move his little princess to Colorado and buy her a spot in our school." "Well, princess, this isn't San Francisco. We don't just roll over for outsiders who think they're special." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her father worked 2 jobs to support their family, and they'd moved to Riverside because it was the only place they could afford after her mother's medical bills. But explaining that would only give Tyler more ammunition. "I'm not trying to take anyone's spot," she said quietly. "I just want to finish my education." Jessica snorted. "Education? Honey, the only thing you need to learn is respect. And since your parents obviously didn't teach you that at home, we'll have to handle your education ourselves." Tyler stood up slowly, his full height casting a shadow over Maya's smaller frame. At 5'4" and 120 pounds, she looked almost childlike next to Derek and Tyler. "Here's lesson 1, Tyler announced loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Know your betters." What happened next would be burned into the memory of every student who witnessed it. Tyler drew back his head, gathered saliva, and spat directly at Maya's face with deliberate, calculated malice. The thick glob of spit flew through the air in slow motion, aimed squarely at her cheek. Maya moved. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, she tilted her head slightly to the left, letting Tyler's spit sail harmlessly past her face. Her right hand came up in a precise arc, catching Tyler's wrist as he was still leaning forward from the force of his spit. Before anyone could blink, Tyler Brooks, star quarterback and self-proclaimed king of Westfield High, was face down on the cafeteria table with his arm twisted behind his back in a perfect submission hold. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and scattered applause, but Maya's focus remained laser-sharp. She applied just enough pressure to Tyler's wrist to make her point without causing permanent damage. Lesson 1, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. She released his arm and stepped back as Tyler scrambled to his feet, his face burning red with humiliation and rage. Jessica's mouth hung open in shock, while Derek stood frozen, unsure whether to help his friend or retreat. Around them, students were pulling out phones, the incident already being uploaded to social media. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Tyler snarled, rubbing his wrist. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Maya picked up her backpack and looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only disappointment. Someone who thinks spitting on people makes him powerful. She turned and walked away, leaving Tyler Brooks standing in the wreckage of his reputation, unaware that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The video of Maya's cafeteria move spread through Westfield High like wildfire. But what most students didn't understand was the significance of what they'd witnessed. In a school where power dynamics had been carved in stone for decades, someone had just shattered the established order with a single defensive motion. This wasn't just about one girl standing up to one bully. This was about challenging an entire system that had protected certain students while sacrificing others for years. Maya Chen had arrived in Riverside 3 weeks earlier with her parents and younger brother, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a carefully guarded secret. Her father, David Chen, worked as a night security supervisor at a medical equipment warehouse while spending his days as a substitute teacher, desperately trying to build enough experience to land a full-time position. Her mother, Linda, managed the books for 3 small businesses from their cramped apartment, her fingers flying across calculator keys late into the night as she stretched every dollar to cover rent, groceries, and her ongoing physical therapy sessions. The family had moved from San Francisco not by choice, but by necessity. Linda's car accident 2 years prior had left her with chronic back pain and medical bills that devoured their savings. When David lost his teaching job due to budget cuts, they'd been forced to sell their small house and relocate somewhere more affordable. Riverside, Colorado offered both lower cost of living and the promise of better opportunities, even if it meant starting over completely. Maya's younger brother Kevin, 13, and entering 8th grade, had adapted to the move with typical teenage resilience. He'd already joined the chess club and made friends with neighbors who shared his passion for gaming, but Maya carried the weight of being the older sibling, the one who needed to set an example and prove that their family belonged in this new community. What her classmates couldn't have known, watching that phone footage loop endlessly on their social media feeds, was that Maya had been training in traditional Shotokan karate since she was 6 years old. Master Takeshi Yamamoto had operated a small dojo 3 blocks from their old apartment in San Francisco, and Maya's parents had enrolled her initially to build confidence and discipline. They'd never imagined their quiet, bookish daughter would develop into a formidable martial artist. Master Yamamoto had been strict about the philosophical aspects of karate, emphasizing that physical techniques were meaningless without proper mental and spiritual development. Karate is not about defeating opponents, he would tell his students. It is about defeating the weaker version of yourself. Maya had absorbed these lessons deeply, understanding that true strength came from protecting others, not dominating them. By age 15, Maya had earned her black belt and begun competing in regional tournaments. Her specialty was kata, the choreographed forms that demonstrated perfect technique and mental focus. But she'd also excelled in kumite, the sparring competitions that tested practical application of skills. Her speed and precision had earned her 3 consecutive state championship titles in California, along with recognition at several national tournaments. When the family moved to Riverside, Maya made a conscious decision to keep her martial arts background private. She'd seen how being different had affected other students at her previous school, and she wanted the chance to fit in normally without the pressure of expectations or the target that came with being known as the karate girl. Her plan was to quietly find a local dojo and continue training without drawing attention to her abilities. That plan had lasted exactly 18 days. Westfield High School operated on a social structure as rigid as any medieval court. At the top sat the athletes, particularly football players, whose success on Friday nights translated to untouchable status during school hours. Below them came the cheerleaders, student government officials, and children of prominent local families. Everyone else existed in various gradations of irrelevance, with new students occupying the bottom rung until they proved worthy of advancement. Tyler Brooks had inherited his position at the apex of this hierarchy. His father, Robert Brooks, owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties and served on the school board. His mother, Patricia, chaired the booster club and organized fundraisers that kept the athletic department flush with new equipment. Tyler himself possessed genuine talent on the football field, with college scouts already expressing interest despite his junior status. But talent and family connections hadn't been enough to satisfy Tyler's need for control. He'd cultivated a reputation for putting outsiders in their place, establishing dominance through a carefully calculated mixture of charm and intimidation. Previous victims had either transferred schools, accepted their assigned low status, or found themselves facing escalating harassment until they broke. Jessica Martinez brought her own brand of social warfare to their partnership. As captain of the varsity cheerleading squad and daughter of the county's most successful real estate agent, she wielded influence through exclusion and rumor-mongering. Students who crossed her found themselves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mysteriously uninvited from parties, dropped from group projects, and subjected to whisper campaigns that destroyed reputations with surgical precision, Derek Wilson served as the enforcer, his physical presence lending credibility to any threats Tyler might make. College coaches were already recruiting him for his linebacker skills, and he used his football reputation to intimidate anyone who might consider challenging the established order. Together, they'd perfected a system of maintaining control that had operated unchallenged for 3 years. Teachers looked the other way, administrators focused on protecting the school's athletic reputation, and students learned to accept their assigned roles without question. Maya's arrival had initially seemed like another routine assertion of dominance. New girl, no connections, quiet demeanor. Perfect target for a demonstration of power that would remind everyone else of their proper place in the hierarchy. But, as Tyler nursed his bruised wrist and wounded pride in the hours following the cafeteria incident, he began to understand that Maya Chen represented something far more dangerous than a typical transfer student. She hadn't just defended herself, she'd done it with a level of skill that suggested extensive training, and more importantly, she'd shown no fear whatsoever of the consequences. For the first time in his high school career, Tyler Brooks faced the possibility that someone might not only refuse to acknowledge his authority, but actually possess the ability to challenge it effectively. The thought kept him awake that night, staring at the ceiling and planning his response. Maya, meanwhile, sat in her family's small apartment helping Kevin with his algebra homework while her parents discussed their daily struggles in the kitchen. She'd hoped to avoid exactly this kind of attention, but Tyler's aggression had forced her hand. Master Yamamoto had always taught that once conflict became unavoidable, it was better to end it quickly and decisively. What she didn't yet realize was that Tyler Brooks had no intention of letting this end quickly, and his next move would escalate their conflict far beyond a simple cafeteria confrontation. The morning after the cafeteria incident, Maya discovered that surviving one confrontation with Tyler Brooks was only the beginning of her problems. Westfield High School had unwritten rules that everyone understood, and the most important one was simple. You don't embarrass Tyler Brooks and walk away unscathed. As Maya approached her locker, she noticed the subtle shifts in student behavior that indicated her life was about to become significantly more complicated. Groups of students who had been chatting normally fell silent as she passed, their conversations resuming in hushed whispers once she moved beyond hearing range. Several kids who had seemed friendly during her first weeks now avoided eye contact, suddenly finding their phone screens fascinating whenever she appeared. Even worse, she caught glimpses of students watching her with obvious curiosity, as if she were an exotic animal who might perform another trick at any moment. Maya understood the social dynamics at play. In challenging Tyler publicly, she'd disrupted an established hierarchy that had kept Westfield running smoothly for years. Students were now forced to choose sides, and most would naturally align with the person who held real power in their daily lives. Tyler Brooks could make the next 3 years miserable for anyone who supported her, while Maya was just a transfer student with no connections and no protection. Her first class, Advanced Placement English with Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, revealed exactly how deep Tyler's influence ran through the school's ecosystem. Mrs. Hendricks had been teaching at Westfield for 22 years and prided herself on maintaining classroom discipline through intimidation and favoritism. She'd developed a system where athletic stars received gentle treatment for late assignments and test preparations, while students she deemed unimportant faced harsh criticism for minor infractions. Maya had submitted her homework on time every day since arriving at Westfield, earning consistent A grades on assignments that demonstrated her strong writing skills and thorough preparation. But when Mrs. Hendricks handed back their latest essays, Maya discovered her paper marked with a C- and covered in red ink corrections that seemed excessive and nitpicky. "Miss Chen," Mrs. Hendricks announced with theatrical authority, "please remain after class. We need to discuss your declining performance." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks as other students filed out, several throwing sympathetic glances her way. Tyler's girlfriend Jessica lingered near the door, obviously eager to witness whatever humiliation Mrs. Hendricks had planned. "Your writing has become sloppy and unfocused," Mrs. Hendricks declared once they were alone, holding up Maya's essay like evidence of a crime. This analysis of symbolism in The Great Gatsby shows fundamental misunderstanding of literary concepts. "I'm concerned that you may have been placed in advanced placement courses above your actual ability level." Maya stared at the paper, recognizing that her analysis was actually more sophisticated than most of her classmates' work. She'd spent 3 hours researching supporting materials and had crafted arguments that drew connections between Fitzgerald's symbolism and broader themes of American disillusionment. The red ink corrections targeted minor word choices and formatting details while ignoring the substantive content. "I believe my analysis correctly identifies multiple symbolic elements and explains their significance to the novel's central themes." Maya replied carefully, keeping her voice respectful but firm. Mrs. Hendricks' eyes narrowed behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Chen, arguing with your teacher about grades is not appropriate behavior. Perhaps you should focus more on humility and less on challenging authority figures." She paused meaningfully. "I understand there was an incident in the cafeteria yesterday involving similar disrespectful behavior." The connection was unmistakable. Maya's academic standing was being threatened as punishment for embarrassing Tyler Brooks. She realized that Mrs. Hendricks was demonstrating exactly how the school's power structure would protect its favorite students while punishing anyone who disrupted the established order. "I understand," Maya said quietly, recognizing that arguing further would only make things worse. She gathered her books and left the classroom with the C- essay that should have been an A, understanding that this was just the first of many retaliations she could expect. The rest of her morning classes followed similar patterns. In calculus, Mr. Roberts questioned her homework answers more aggressively than usual, requiring her to explain solutions that were obviously correct. During chemistry lab, her assigned partner suddenly requested a transfer to another group, claiming scheduling conflicts that made no sense. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Teachers and students were distancing themselves to avoid guilt by association. Lunch presented the greatest challenge. Maya had no intention of avoiding the cafeteria, knowing that hiding would signal weakness and invite further aggression. But as she entered the dining hall, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. The table where yesterday's confrontation had occurred remained conspicuously empty, as if students feared contamination from the sight of Tyler's humiliation. Maya chose a table near the windows, positioning herself where she could observe most of the room while keeping her back protected. Her mother had packed leftover stir-fry that filled the air with aromatic spices, another reminder of how different she was from her classmates, who mostly ate processed foods from the school's cafeteria line. "Mind if I sit here?" Maya looked up to see a slender boy with dark hair and paint-stained fingers standing nervously beside her table. She recognized him from her art class but hadn't learned his name yet. His clothes were thrift store finds, rather than injustices, he announced during one particularly uncomfortable exchange. Perhaps she could enlighten us about whether past grievances should influence present-day perspectives. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, clearly intended to bait Maya into expressing views that could be twisted into evidence of her being a troublemaker. Maya navigated these academic landmines with careful precision, but the constant vigilance required to avoid giving her teachers ammunition against her was exhausting. She found herself second-guessing every comment, editing her natural responses to avoid any statement that could be misconstrued as disrespectful or confrontational. The social isolation intensified as Tyler's influence spread through the student body like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Students who had initially shown interest in befriending the new girl began avoiding her with obvious deliberation. Lab partners requested transfers, study group invitations mysteriously disappeared, and conversations died abruptly whenever she approached. Sarah Kim, a girl from Maya's chemistry class who had seemed genuinely friendly during the first weeks of school, provided a particularly painful example of how quickly alliances could shift. They had worked well together on several lab assignments, and Sarah had even suggested they study together for the upcoming midterm exam. But after the cafeteria incident, Sarah's behavior changed dramatically. "I can't meet for our study session," Sarah said awkwardly when Maya approached her after class. "My mom needs help with something at home." The excuse might have been believable if Maya hadn't overheard Sarah making plans with other classmates for that same evening. When Maya tried to reschedule, Sarah suddenly developed a series of family obligations that seemed to coincide perfectly with any time Maya suggested. The message was clear: associating with Maya had become socially dangerous, and students were choosing self-preservation over potential friendship. Even those who might have sympathized with her situation lacked the courage to risk Tyler's displeasure by showing public support. Tyler's girlfriend Jessica emerged as a particularly creative architect of psychological warfare, wielding social media and gossip networks with devastating effectiveness. She began a whisper campaign that painted Maya as an aggressive outsider who had attacked Tyler without provocation, conveniently omitting the spitting incident that had triggered the confrontation. "I heard she has anger management issues," Jessica would say during carefully staged conversations in hallways where Maya was sure to overhear. "Apparently, she got kicked out of her last school for fighting. That's probably why her family had to move here." The lies spread with viral efficiency, each retelling adding new embellishments that made Maya sound increasingly dangerous and unstable. The rumors reached Maya's teachers, adding another layer of scrutiny to her classroom experience. Coach Stevens, who taught Maya's health class, began treating her with obvious suspicion, watching her interactions with other students as if she might explode into violence at any moment. During a unit on conflict resolution, he made pointed comments about students who chose physical responses over communication, his eyes fixed meaningfully on Maya throughout the lecture. Physical intimidation escalated beyond Derek's cafeteria threats as Tyler recruited additional football players to participate in his campaign. They developed a routine of clustering around Maya's locker between classes, not quite blocking her path but making it necessary for her to navigate through a wall of hostile male bodies to reach her books. The players would engage in loud conversations about outsiders who don't understand how things work around here, while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid official consequences. The hallway encounters grew more aggressive as Tyler tested the boundaries of what he could accomplish without triggering administrative intervention. "Players would injustices," he announced during one particularly uncomfortable exchange. Perhaps she could enlighten us about whether past grievances should influence present-day perspectives. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, clearly intended to bait Maya into expressing views that could be twisted into evidence of her being a troublemaker. Maya navigated these academic landmines with careful precision, but the constant vigilance required to avoid giving her teachers ammunition against her was exhausting. She found herself second-guessing every comment, editing her natural responses to avoid any statement that could be misconstrued as disrespectful or confrontational. The social isolation intensified as Tyler's influence spread through the student body like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Students who had initially shown interest in befriending the new girl began avoiding her with obvious deliberation. Lab partners requested transfers, study group invitations mysteriously disappeared, and conversations died abruptly whenever she approached. Sarah Kim, a girl from Maya's chemistry class who had seemed genuinely friendly during the first weeks of school, provided a particularly painful example of how quickly alliances could shift. They had worked well together on several lab assignments, and Sarah had even suggested they study together for the upcoming midterm exam. But after the cafeteria incident, Sarah's behavior changed dramatically. "I can't meet for our study session," Sarah said awkwardly when Maya approached her after class. "My mom needs help with something at home." The excuse might have been believable if Maya hadn't overheard Sarah making plans with other classmates for that same evening. When Maya tried to reschedule, Sarah suddenly developed a series of family obligations that seemed to coincide perfectly with any time Maya suggested. The message was clear: associating with Maya had become socially dangerous, and students were choosing self-preservation over potential friendship. Even those who might have sympathized with her situation lacked the courage to risk Tyler's displeasure by showing public support. Tyler's girlfriend Jessica emerged as a particularly creative architect of psychological warfare, wielding social media and gossip networks with devastating effectiveness. She began a whisper campaign that painted Maya as an aggressive outsider who had attacked Tyler without provocation, conveniently omitting the spitting incident that had triggered the confrontation. "I heard she has anger management issues," Jessica would say during carefully staged conversations in hallways where Maya was sure to overhear. Apparently, she got kicked out of her last school for fighting. That's probably why her family had to move here. The lies spread with viral efficiency, each retelling adding new embellishments that made Maya sound increasingly dangerous and unstable. The rumors reached Maya's teachers, adding another layer of scrutiny to her classroom experience. Coach Stevens, who taught Maya's health class, began treating her with obvious suspicion, watching her interactions with other students as if she might explode into violence at any moment. During a unit on conflict resolution, he made pointed comments about students who chose physical responses over communication, his eyes fixed meaningfully on Maya throughout the lecture. Physical intimidation escalated beyond Derek's cafeteria threats as Tyler recruited additional football players to participate in his campaign. They developed a routine of clustering around Maya's locker between classes, not quite blocking her path but making it necessary for her to navigate through a wall of hostile male bodies to reach her books. The players would engage in loud conversations about outsiders who don't understand how things work around here, while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid official consequences. The hallway encounters grew more aggressive as Tyler tested the boundaries of what he could accomplish without triggering administrative intervention. Players would deficiency, as even sympathetic students began avoiding Maya to protect themselves from becoming secondary targets. Jessica Martinez had emerged as the most creative architect of psychological torture, wielding social media and gossip networks with surgical precision. She had organized a whisper campaign that spread fabricated stories about Maya's family background, claiming that they had fled California to escape criminal charges and were living in Riverside under assumed identities. The lies were absurd enough that most adults would have dismissed them immediately, but they resonated perfectly with teenage insecurities about outsiders and different cultures. The rumors reached Maya's teachers through parent complaints, adding another layer of scrutiny to her classroom experience. Principal Hayes had called her into his office twice for informal discussions about her adjustment to Westfield's academic environment, clearly fishing for evidence of the behavioral problems that anonymous parents had reported. Maya navigated these conversations with careful diplomacy, providing respectful answers while revealing nothing that could be twisted into ammunition against her. Tyler's campaign expanded beyond the school building as his network began targeting Maya's family directly. Her father received anonymous phone calls at work questioning his qualifications and suggesting that he was taking jobs away from more deserving local candidates. Her mother's business clients began canceling contracts after receiving concerned citizen warnings about associating with families who might bring unwanted attention to their respectable enterprises. The Chen family's integration into Riverside community life faced increasing obstacles as Tyler's influence spread through his parents' social and business connections. Robert Brooks, Tyler's father, controlled significant business relationships throughout the county, while Patricia Brooks wielded considerable influence through her charitable organizations and social clubs. Their subtle pressure campaign made it clear that supporting the Chen family could result in social and economic consequences for other community members. Maya's younger brother Kevin began experiencing harassment at his middle school as Tyler's campaign trickled down through family connections and sibling networks. Eighth-grade versions of Tyler's tactics emerged as Kevin found himself excluded from group activities and subjected to whispered comments about his family's supposed criminal background. The expansion of harassment to include her innocent younger brother pushed Maya's emotional control to its absolute breaking point. The physical intimidation escalated as Tyler recruited additional football players to participate in his campaign. They developed sophisticated harassment techniques that stayed just below the threshold of actionable misconduct while creating an atmosphere of constant menace. Players would position themselves in hallways to force Maya into uncomfortable proximity with their bulky bodies, muttering threats and insults that were carefully designed to avoid detection by security cameras or passing teachers. Derek Wilson had perfected a routine of accidentally bumping into Maya with sufficient force to send her books flying while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. The crashes were loud enough to draw attention from other students, creating public humiliation while allowing Derek to offer mocking apologies that demonstrated his power to hurt her without consequences. Maya's attempts to avoid these encounters by varying her routes between classes only resulted in the football players expanding their territorial coverage. The harassment followed Maya beyond school grounds as Tyler's network began orchestrating encounters in public spaces throughout Riverside. Players would show up at the grocery store where Maya's mother shopped, making loud comments about families who didn't belong in their community. They would appear at the public library where Maya studied, engaging in disruptive conversations designed to make her uncomfortable enough to leave. The message was clear: nowhere in Riverside was safe from Tyler's influence. Maya's martial arts training had prepared her to handle physical confrontations, but the psychological warfare that Tyler employed was far more sophisticated than anything Master Yamamoto had addressed in their traditional Shotokan classes. The constant stress of navigating hostile territory while protecting her family from knowledge of the harassment was exhausting in ways that physical challenges could never match. She found herself questioning whether continuing to fight was worth the escalating cost to everyone she cared about. The breaking point arrived during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning assembly in Westfield High's main auditorium. Principal Hayes had organized a special presentation about college preparation and scholarship opportunities, featuring representatives from several prestigious universities who would discuss application processes and academic requirements. Maya had looked forward to the event as a rare opportunity to focus on her educational future rather than survival tactics. The auditorium seating was arranged alphabetically by last name, which placed Maya in the fourth row between Jennifer Chang and Michael Collins. She had arrived early to secure her assigned seat, hoping to avoid the usual territorial disputes that occurred whenever students were given specific seating arrangements. The representatives from Colorado State University and University of Denver were setting up their presentation materials on stage, while students filed into the auditorium with the controlled chaos typical of school assemblies. Tyler Brooks and his crew occupied seats 3 rows behind Maya, their strategic positioning allowing them to observe her reactions while remaining outside her direct line of sight. Maya could feel their hostile attention like heat radiating from a furnace, but she forced herself to focus on the presentation materials that the college representatives were distributing. Her academic records were strong enough to qualify for significant scholarship opportunities if she could maintain her grades despite the ongoing harassment campaign. The college presentation began with standard information about application deadlines and admissions requirements, but Maya found herself genuinely engaged as the representatives discussed specialized programs and research opportunities. For 45 minutes, she was able to forget about Tyler's campaign and imagine a future where her academic achievements would be judged on merit rather than filtered through small-town prejudices and social hierarchies. The positive momentum shattered when Principal Hayes opened the floor for student questions about college preparation. Tyler Brooks raised his hand with theatrical enthusiasm, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system as he posed what appeared to be a legitimate inquiry about athletic scholarships for student athletes with leadership experience. "I'm wondering about opportunities for students who demonstrate leadership in challenging situations," Tyler said, his tone perfectly crafted to sound earnest and thoughtful. "For example, how do colleges evaluate applicants who have had to deal with disruptive influences in their academic environment?" The question seemed innocent enough that the college representatives responded with standard advice about demonstrating resilience and problem-solving skills in application essays. But Maya recognized the setup, understanding that Tyler was creating a foundation for something more sinister. Her body tensed instinctively as she prepared for whatever attack he was planning. Tyler's follow-up question revealed his true intentions with devastating clarity. What about situations where transfer students bring behavioral problems that affect the learning environment for everyone else? He continued, his eyes fixed meaningfully on the back of Maya's head. How should responsible student leaders document those issues to protect their own academic opportunities? The auditorium fell silent as students and faculty recognized that Tyler was making a public accusation disguised as a college preparation question. Maya felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her, as Tyler's implication became unmistakable. He was claiming that she represented a behavioral problem that other students needed protection from, using the college presentation as a platform to legitimize his harassment campaign. Principal Hayes attempted to redirect the conversation toward more general topics, but Tyler had already achieved his objective of publicly identifying Maya as a disruptive influence in front of college representatives and the entire student body. The damage was immediate and devastating, as whispered conversations erupted throughout the auditorium while Maya sat frozen in her seat, understanding that Tyler had found a new way to humiliate her using institutional authority as his weapon. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, but Maya heard nothing beyond the rushing sound of her own heartbeat and the scattered comments from students around her. Tyler had effectively branded her as a troublemaker in front of college representatives who might remember her name when she submitted applications. More importantly, he had demonstrated to the entire school that she was powerless to defend herself against public humiliation. As the assembly concluded and students began filing out of the auditorium, Maya remained in her seat, struggling to process the implications of Tyler's latest attack. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was active sabotage of her educational future, using tactics that she had no obvious way to counter. Fighting back physically would only confirm Tyler's characterization of her as violent and unstable, while ignoring the attack would signal acceptance of his right to destroy her reputation. Tyler's voice cut through the ambient noise as students moved toward the exits, his words carefully pitched to carry just far enough for Maya to hear without attracting adult attention. "Hope that was educational," he said with mock sincerity. College representatives love hearing about students who cause problems for their classmates. Maya's hands clenched into fists, as she finally understood that Tyler's campaign would never end through passive resistance or attempts at reasonable compromise. He viewed her continued presence at Westfield as an ongoing challenge to his authority that required increasingly severe responses. The harassment would escalate until she either surrendered completely or found a way to stop him permanently. The hallway outside the auditorium buzzed with excited conversations as students discussed Tyler's public questioning and its obvious target. Maya moved through the crowd with growing awareness that her reputation had suffered potentially irreparable damage. College representatives would remember the exchange, teachers would view her with increased suspicion, and students would see her as someone even Tyler Brooks considered problematic enough to call out publicly. Alex Rodriguez intercepted Maya near her locker, his face reflecting the same shock and anger that she was struggling to contain. "That was completely out of line," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wasn't being monitored. Everyone knows what he was doing. It was character assassination using college prep as cover. Maya appreciated Alex's support, but she could see the strain that associating with her was placing on his own academic prospects. His scholarship applications depended on maintaining positive relationships with teachers and administrators who were increasingly viewing her as a liability. Their friendship was becoming another casualty of Tyler's systematic campaign to isolate her from any potential allies. "You should distance yourself from me," Maya said with painful honesty. "Tyler's not going to stop, and I won't let my problems destroy your future." The words hurt to speak, but she recognized that protecting Alex meant accepting even greater isolation as the price of her continued resistance. Alex's response was interrupted by the arrival of Derek Wilson and two other football players who positioned themselves around Maya's locker with obvious territorial intent. Their body language communicated threat and intimidation while remaining subtle enough to avoid attracting intervention from the teachers who were supervising hallway transitions between classes. "Heard you got some college education today," Derek said with a grin that revealed too many teeth. Tyler was just trying to help those representatives understand what kind of students they might be dealing with. Community service, you might say. Maya closed her locker door with deliberate calm, understanding that Derek was attempting to provoke a reaction that could be used as evidence of her supposed behavioral problems. The football players were creating a semicircle, that forced other students to detour around their group, effectively putting Maya on display as someone who required special monitoring and containment. "We're just concerned about academic standards," added Marcus Stevens, a senior linebacker whose father served on the school board. "Transfer students sometimes struggle to meet Westfield's expectations, and we want to make sure everyone gets the support they need to succeed." The mock concern in his voice was so transparent that several passing students rolled their eyes, but none of them intervened to challenge the obvious harassment. Maya shouldered her backpack and attempted to leave for her next class, but the football players shifted position to maintain their circle around her. They weren't quite blocking her path, but their movements made it clear that she would need their permission to escape the confrontation. The hallway was full of witnesses, but Maya understood that most students would remember Tyler's version of events, rather than the details of how she was being cornered. "Where are you headed?" Derek asked with false friendliness. "Maybe we should walk with you. Make sure you don't have any more adjustment problems. Tyler's really worried about your integration into our school community." The mention of Tyler's concern was designed to remind Maya that this harassment was occurring under his direction and with his full approval. The football players were operating as his enforcement arm, carrying out intimidation that he could later disavow while maintaining plausible deniability about his involvement in their actions. Maya's patience had reached its absolute limit after 6 weeks of escalating psychological warfare. Tyler's public attack during the college assembly had demonstrated that he would never stop escalating, and his willingness to damage her educational future showed that he viewed her as an existential threat that required complete elimination. The realization crystallized her understanding that passive resistance had failed, and more direct action was necessary to end the harassment campaign. "I appreciate your concern," Maya said with careful politeness, "but I can manage my own academic adjustment without assistance from people who create the problems they claim to be solving." The response was more direct than Derek had expected from someone he considered a defeated opponent. Maya's words carried an edge of defiance that suggested she was preparing to fight back, rather than continue accepting his crew's intimidation. Derek's expression hardened, as he recognized that their usual tactics might not be sufficient to maintain control over this particular target. "That's an interesting attitude," Derek replied, stepping closer to Maya in a move designed to use his superior size for psychological intimidation, especially from someone who caused such a scene in the auditorium. "Maybe you need a more personal lesson about respecting people who are trying to help you." The confrontation was escalating beyond verbal harassment into the territory of physical intimidation that Maya's martial arts training had prepared her to handle. She could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat, her body automatically shifting into the relaxed alertness that Master Yamamoto had drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice. Derek's next move crossed the line from intimidation into assault as he deliberately shouldered into Maya with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the lockers. The impact was hard enough to rattle the metal doors and draw winces from students who witnessed the obvious aggression. Derek's size advantage made the attack seem casual to observers, but Maya felt the deliberate malice behind the seemingly accidental contact. "Oops," Derek said with the same mock contrition that Tyler had perfected. "Guess I didn't see you there. These hallways get pretty crowded between classes. Maybe you should be more careful about where you position yourself." Maya steadied herself against the lockers, her mind calculating angles and distances while her body prepared for the defensive actions that Derek's aggression had made inevitable. The hallway was full of witnesses, but she understood that any physical response would be portrayed as unprovoked violence, regardless of the circumstances that had triggered it. "You're right," Maya agreed quietly, her voice carrying a new note that Derek was too arrogant to recognize as dangerous. "I should definitely be more careful about positioning." Derek interpreted her words as submission and moved closer for what he intended to be the final humiliation that would cement her defeat. "Smart girl," he said, reaching out to pat Maya's shoulder, in a gesture that was designed to demonstrate his physical dominance while appearing paternalistic to onlookers. Maya's response was faster than Derek's eyes could track, and more devastating than his football experience had prepared him to handle. She caught his extended wrist in a grip that immobilized his entire arm, while simultaneously stepping inside his reach to negate his size advantage. Before Derek could react, Maya executed a perfect iraminage throw that used his own momentum and body weight against him. Derek Wilson, who outweighed Maya by more than 100 pounds and stood 8 inches taller, found himself airborne for a brief moment before crashing into the hallway floor with bone-jarring impact. The throw was so smooth and technically perfect that most observers couldn't immediately process what had happened. One moment, Derek was reaching out to intimidate Maya, and the next moment he was sprawled on the linoleum surrounded by scattered textbooks and shocked silence. The hallway erupted in gasps and scattered applause as students realized that the quiet transfer student had just effortlessly defeated one of Westfield's most intimidating athletes. Maya stood over Derek's prone form with perfect balance and composure, her breathing barely elevated despite having just executed a technique that required precise timing and considerable physical skill. "Like I said," Maya observed calmly, "positioning is important." Derek struggled to his feet with obvious difficulty, his pride wounded even more severely than his body. He had been humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses by someone he had dismissed as helpless prey. The other football players who had been supporting his harassment campaign suddenly looked uncertain about their ability to intimidate someone who possessed skills they couldn't understand or counter. "You're gonna pay for that," Derek snarled, his face flushed with embarrassment and mounting rage. "Nobody puts their hands on me and walks away." Maya maintained her defensive stance, feet positioned for optimal mobility, and hands ready to block or redirect whatever clumsy attack Derek might attempt. Her martial arts training had taught her that defeating one opponent often encouraged others to test their luck, and she was prepared for the possibility that Derek's humiliation might trigger a group assault. "I didn't put my hands on you," Maya corrected with absolute accuracy. "I used your own force against you when you chose to assault me." Basic physics combined with traditional Shotokan technique. The mention of Shotokan karate sent murmurs through the crowd of observers as students began to understand that Maya's defensive abilities were the result of formal training rather than lucky improvisation. Several students pulled out phones to record what they sensed might be an even more dramatic confrontation, while others began backing away to avoid getting caught in the expanding conflict zone. Derek's second attack was even more aggressive than his first, combining football tackle techniques with raw fury as he charged toward Maya with clear intent to overpower her through superior size and strength. Maya waited until the last possible moment before stepping aside and redirecting Derek's momentum with a perfectly timed hip throw that sent him crashing into a row of lockers with metallic thunder. The impact was loud enough to attract attention from teachers in nearby classrooms. But Maya's technique had been so clean and defensive that observers could clearly see who was the aggressor in their confrontation. Derek was the one initiating attacks while Maya simply neutralized his assaults using minimal necessary force to protect herself from harm. Marcus Stevens decided to support his teammate by grabbing Maya from behind in a move that escalated the confrontation from one-on-one combat to a multiple opponent scenario. Maya's response demonstrated why Master Yamamoto had insisted that his advanced students train against multiple attackers using traditional kata applications that most schools never taught. Maya dropped her weight and twisted sharply to break Marcus's grip, while simultaneously striking backward with her elbow to discourage his continued participation. The elbow strike connected solidly with Marcus's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and doubling him over in pain. Before he could recover, Maya had spun around and applied a standing armbar that gave her complete control over his movement, while threatening serious joint damage if he continued resisting. "I suggest you reconsider your involvement," Maya advised as Marcus struggled unsuccessfully against her leverage advantage. This started with Derek's assault, and it can end with everyone walking away relatively intact. The demonstration of technical superiority against two opponents simultaneously had a dramatic effect on the crowd of observers. Students who had previously viewed Maya as a helpless victim of Tyler's harassment campaign suddenly understood that she possessed the ability to defend herself against multiple attackers using skills that none of Westfield's athletes could match. Derek climbed to his feet for the third time, his movements unsteady as he dealt with the cumulative effects of being thrown twice by someone he had massively underestimated. His football training had prepared him for contact with other large, strong opponents, but Maya's techniques relied on precision and leverage rather than brute force. Fighting her was like trying to tackle smoke that occasionally turned solid long enough to hurt him. "This isn't over," Derek threatened, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. "Tyler's gonna hear about this, and then you'll really be in trouble." Maya released Marcus's arm and stepped back to maintain distance from both football players while keeping herself positioned where she could observe the rest of the hallway for additional threats. Her tactical awareness had been sharpened by years of kumite sparring against multiple opponents, and she understood that Derek's mention of Tyler was probably a signal for him to arrive with reinforcements. "Tyler can hear about whatever you want to tell him," Maya replied with calm confidence. "But he should probably understand that I'm not the helpless victim he thinks I am." The crowd of student observers had grown substantially as word of the fight spread through social media and text messages. Maya could see phones recording from multiple angles, understanding that video of her defensive techniques would reach every corner of Westfield High within minutes. The footage would either vindicate her actions as legitimate self-defense or provide Tyler with evidence to support claims that she was violent and dangerous. Tyler Brooks himself appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by Jessica Martinez and 3 additional football players who had been summoned by Derek's emergency text messages. Tyler's expression cycled through surprise, anger, and calculation as he observed the scene. 2 of his enforcers looking disheveled and defeated while Maya stood calmly among the wreckage of their intimidation campaign. "What's going on here?" Tyler demanded with the authoritative tone he had perfected through years of expecting immediate compliance from anyone he questioned. Multiple students began explaining simultaneously, their accounts creating a cacophony of conflicting perspectives on who had started the confrontation and how it had escalated so quickly. Maya remained silent, understanding that anything she said would be twisted to support Tyler's narrative, while her actions had already spoken more clearly than words could convey. Tyler listened to the various accounts with growing fury, as he realized that his harassment campaign had not only failed to intimidate Maya into submission, but had actually provided her with opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that made her far more dangerous than he had imagined. The girl he had dismissed as easy prey had just defeated 2 of his strongest supporters using martial arts techniques that suggested extensive training and competitive experience. "Everybody needs to calm down," Tyler announced with forced reasonableness, his political instincts recognizing that the situation had become too public for his usual intimidation tactics. "There's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding that got out of hand." Maya watched Tyler's performance with growing understanding of his tactical sophistication. He was attempting to reframe the confrontation as a mutual misunderstanding, rather than a clear case of his supporters attacking her without provocation. The strategy would allow him to avoid blame while positioning himself as a peacemaker trying to resolve conflicts that other people had created. "The misunderstanding," Maya said clearly enough for all observers to hear, "is thinking that harassment and assault are acceptable ways to handle disagreements with other students." Her words cut through Tyler's attempt at misdirection with surgical precision, identifying the true nature of the conflict while putting responsibility squarely on the people who had initiated aggressive actions. Several students nodded in agreement, recognizing that Derek and Marcus had clearly been the aggressors in their confrontation with Maya. Tyler's mask of reasonable concern slipped slightly, as he realized that Maya was not going to accept his narrative framework or allow him to control the conversation. She had demonstrated both the physical ability to defend herself and the intellectual sophistication to counter his propaganda efforts. For the first time in his high school career, Tyler faced an opponent who possessed the tools necessary to challenge his authority effectively. "Maya," Tyler said, using her first name in a calculated attempt to sound personal and concerned, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about how your presence at Westfield is affecting other students. Some people are feeling unsafe because of incidents like this." The accusation was so perfectly crafted that Maya almost admired its audacity. Tyler was portraying her self-defense against his supporters' attacks as evidence that she made other students feel unsafe. The logic was completely inverted, but it would resonate with administrators who prioritized avoiding controversy over determining the truth about conflicts between students. "You're absolutely right," Maya agreed with unexpected enthusiasm. "Students should feel safe from harassment, intimidation, and assault while they're trying to get an education." Tyler's expression hardened as he recognized that Maya was turning his own rhetoric against him, while the growing crowd of observers listened to their exchange. She was forcing him to either abandon his victim narrative or explicitly argue that harassment was acceptable when directed at people he disliked. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Principal Hayes and two security guards who had been alerted by teachers that a crowd was forming in the main hallway. Hayes surveyed the scene with obvious irritation, recognizing that whatever had happened would require careful handling to avoid negative publicity for the school district. "Everyone except the involved parties needs to clear this hallway immediately," Hayes announced with administrative authority. "Classes are in session, and this gathering is disrupting the educational environment." Students began dispersing reluctantly, many continuing to record with their phones as they moved toward their assigned classrooms. Maya understood that the footage would be analyzed and discussed throughout Westfield High, either establishing her as someone who could defend herself effectively, or providing Tyler with evidence to support claims about her violent tendencies. Hayes turned his attention to the core group that remained in the hallway: Maya, Tyler, Derek, Marcus, and the witnesses who had been closest to the actual fighting. His expression suggested that he viewed the entire situation as an administrative headache that would require delicate handling to avoid escalating into larger problems. "Mr. Wilson, Mr. Stevens," Hayes addressed the two football players, "you both look like you've been in some kind of altercation. Do you require medical attention?" Derek straightened his shoulders and attempted to project his usual intimidating presence despite the obvious damage to his pride and posture. "No, sir. We're fine. Just had a little disagreement that got out of hand." Hayes's eyes moved to Maya, taking in her calm demeanor and complete lack of injury or dishevelment. The contrast between her composed appearance and the football player's obvious distress suggested a story that might be more complex than simple teenage conflict. "Miss Chen," Hayes continued, "several students have reported that you were involved in physical altercations with Mr. Wilson and Mr. Stevens. Is that accurate?" Maya chose her words carefully, understanding that her response would be documented and potentially used against her in disciplinary proceedings. "I defended myself when Mr. Wilson assaulted me, and I neutralized Mr. Stevens when he grabbed me from behind. Everything I did was purely defensive." The clinical precision of her language impressed Hayes while simultaneously creating a framework that portrayed her actions as justified responses to aggression rather than unprovoked violence. Maya's choice to use terms like neutralized also suggested formal training that went beyond casual self-defense knowledge. Tyler sensed that the narrative was developing in ways that threatened his position, so he attempted to regain control by providing his own version of events. "Principal Hayes, I think there's been a pattern of aggressive behavior that needs to be addressed. Maya has been having trouble adjusting to Westfield's environment, and today's incident shows that the situation is escalating." Hayes nodded thoughtfully, recognizing Tyler's attempt to establish a broader context that would justify viewing Maya as the primary problem rather than examining the specific circumstances of the current confrontation. The strategy was politically sophisticated for a teenager, demonstrating exactly why Tyler had maintained his position at the top of Westfield's social hierarchy. "Mr. Brooks," Hayes replied carefully, "I appreciate your concern about school climate issues. However, today's investigation will focus on what happened here and now, based on witness statements and any available evidence." The response was diplomatic but clear. Hayes was not going to allow Tyler to control the investigation by introducing unsubstantiated claims about Maya's general behavior. The principal understood that the current situation was being recorded and documented by multiple sources, making it essential to handle the investigation with obvious fairness. Maya felt a surge of hope as she realized that Hayes was approaching the situation with apparent objectivity rather than automatically accepting Tyler's version of events. The principal's careful neutrality suggested that he might actually investigate what had happened rather than simply disciplining her to appease Tyler's influential parents. The formal investigation took place in the principal's office over the next 2 hours, with each participant providing written statements while security guards reviewed hallway camera footage and interviewed student witnesses. Maya's account was corroborated by video evidence showing Derek's initial assault and Marcus's decision to grab her from behind, while multiple student witnesses confirmed that she had acted purely in self-defense. Derek's attempt to portray the confrontation as mutual combat collapsed when security footage clearly showed him initiating aggressive contact and then attacking Maya again after she had attempted to disengage. Marcus's claim that he was trying to break up the fight was contradicted by video evidence showing him grabbing Maya from behind while she was defending herself against Derek's assault. Tyler's effort to paint Maya as generally violent and unstable was undermined by testimony from students who described the systematic harassment campaign that had preceded the hallway confrontation. Alex Rodriguez provided detailed accounts of the academic sabotage, social isolation, and escalating intimidation that Maya had endured for 6 weeks, while other students corroborated specific incidents they had witnessed. The investigation revealed the full scope of Tyler's harassment campaign, including evidence of the digital stalking, parent complaints based on fabricated stories, and coordination with teachers to create artificial academic problems for Maya. Principal Hayes found himself confronting a systematic pattern of abuse that had operated under his administration's nose for weeks without triggering official intervention. More damaging for Tyler was the discovery that his public questioning during the college assembly had been planned as part of his harassment campaign rather than legitimate educational inquiry. The college representatives confirmed that Tyler's questions had been inappropriate and potentially defamatory, raising concerns about Westfield High's commitment to providing a safe educational environment for all students. The disciplinary decisions reflected the clear evidence about who had initiated aggressive actions and who had responded defensively. Derek Wilson and Marcus Stevens received 10-day suspensions for assault and harassment, while Tyler Brooks faced a more serious consequence, removal from all leadership positions, and a formal reprimand that would be included in his college application files. Maya received no disciplinary action after the investigation confirmed that her use of martial arts techniques had been purely defensive and proportionate to the threats she faced. Principal Hayes actually commended her restraint in using minimal necessary force to neutralize attackers who significantly outweighed her, noting that her training had probably prevented more serious injuries. The investigation's outcome sent shockwaves through Westfield High's social hierarchy, as students realized that Tyler Brooks was not invulnerable to consequences for his actions. The video footage of Maya's defensive techniques had spread throughout the school, establishing her reputation as someone who possessed both the ability and willingness to protect herself against multiple attackers. Tyler's removal from student council and other leadership positions effectively ended his reign as Westfield's unofficial king, while the formal documentation of his harassment campaign provided protection for Maya against future retaliation. More importantly, other students who had previously suffered in silence began coming forward with their own accounts of Tyler's systematic bullying. The Hapios Hawanihir's revelation that Maya was a legitimate martial artist with competitive experience transformed her social standing completely. Students who had previously avoided her out of fear now approached with genuine curiosity and respect. Her reputation as someone who could defend herself effectively made her a natural ally for other students facing bullying situations. Alex Rodriguez never had to worry about harassment again, as Tyler's remaining supporters understood that targeting Maya's friends would invite retaliation they were completely unprepared to handle. The art department received improved funding as parents learned about the harassment Maya had endured and wanted to support positive activities that build community rather than division. Maya's academic performance improved dramatically once she was free from the constant stress of Tyler's harassment campaign. Teachers who had been influenced by the rumor mill began evaluating her work objectively, discovering that she was indeed qualified for advanced coursework and possessed insights that enriched classroom discussions. The Chen family's status in Riverside improved as community members learned the truth about the conflict and Maya's heroic response to systematic harassment. Her father received offers for permanent teaching positions once administrators realized that the negative parent feedback had been artificially generated as part of Tyler's campaign against his daughter. Maya's story spread beyond Westfield High, as news outlets picked up the account of a teenage girl who had used martial arts training to defend herself against coordinated bullying. Master Yamamoto called from San Francisco to express pride in his former student's application of karate principles, emphasizing that she had used her skills exactly as intended to protect herself and others from injustice. The martial arts club that Maya founded at Westfield High attracted dozens of students who wanted to learn self-defense techniques while building confidence and discipline. The club's emphasis on traditional values and defensive applications attracted support from parents and administrators who recognized the positive impact that structured martial arts training could have on teenage development. Tyler Brooks transferred to a private military academy in Denver before the semester ended, unable to handle the loss of status and respect that followed his exposure as a systematic bully. His departure marked the end of an era at Westfield High, where students began to understand that real leadership came from protecting others rather than dominating them. Jessica Martinez's social media harassment campaign collapsed when students realized that Maya's supposed behavioral problems were fabricated stories designed to justify systematic abuse. Jessica's own reputation suffered as evidence emerged of her role in coordinating the digital attacks and rumor campaigns that had made Maya's life miserable. The college representatives who had witnessed Tyler's inappropriate questioning during the assembly contacted their admissions offices to ensure that Maya's name was not associated with the behavioral problems that Tyler had tried to attribute to her. Several universities actually expressed increased interest in recruiting a student who had demonstrated such remarkable resilience and character under pressure. Maya finished her junior year at Westfield High as student council president, captain of the martial arts club, and recipient of the school's first anti-bullying advocacy award. But more importantly, she had learned that standing up for principles sometimes required accepting serious risks, and that the courage to do what was right could inspire others to find their own strength. The hallway where Derek Wilson had assaulted her became known as the place where Westfield High's culture began changing from one that protected bullies to one that supported victims. Maya's defensive techniques had done more than neutralize physical attackers. They had demonstrated that systematic harassment could be defeated by someone with sufficient training, courage, and determination. Principal Hayes implemented new policies that provided clear channels for reporting harassment and established consequences for students who abused their social or athletic status to intimidate others. The changes came too late to help previous victims of Tyler's campaigns, but they created protection for future students who might face similar challenges. Maya's parents finally learned the full extent of what their daughter had endured and overcome during her first semester at Westfield High. Their pride in her resilience was matched by their determination to ensure that other families wouldn't face similar challenges when seeking to build new lives in communities that initially viewed them as outsiders. The lesson that resonated throughout Riverside was simple but profound. Bullies maintained their power only as long as good people remained silent or felt powerless to intervene. Maya Chen had demonstrated that one person with the right combination of skills, principles, and courage could challenge entire systems of oppression and create lasting positive change. The girl who had arrived in Riverside as a quiet transfer student seeking only to complete her education had become a symbol of the truth that justice sometimes required individuals to take personal risks in defense of broader principles. Her willingness to use her martial arts training to protect herself and others had inspired a cultural shift that would benefit students for years to come. Master Yamamoto's teachings about karate being a tool for protecting others rather than dominating them had found perfect expression in Maya's actions at Westfield High. She had used her skills to defeat aggression without becoming aggressive herself, demonstrating the philosophical maturity that separated true martial artists from people who simply knew how to fight. The snow that had dusted Westfield High on the morning of Maya's final confrontation with Tyler's harassment campaign had melted away, but the changes she had brought to the school's culture would endure for generations. Students would remember her story as proof that systematic injustice could be overcome by individuals who refused to accept defeat and possessed the tools necessary to fight back effectively. Maya's desk in her new advanced placement classes remained free from vandalism, but she knew that if anyone ever tried to destroy something she cared about again, they would discover that some people refused to be intimidated no matter how powerful their opponents believed themselves to be. The quiet transfer student had become a guardian of justice, whose presence reminded everyone that courage and skill could triumph over privilege and prejudice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.